Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer. He's Dylan Tovitz. Not sure if you caught us messing with our hair and stuff, but we've been sleeping a lot. It's the bye week. We're finally catching up a little bit, but doing a big win over Auburn to discuss for this Vanderbilt team and a lot in the playoff discussion as well. I think Saturday the real story to me was that they stayed alive, but another big story. Clark Lee called his team a physiologically mature team, and I think that meant a lot. To them, and I think that just kind of indicates what Saturday said about them in a lot of ways, where they were down 20 to 10 at halftime, they were down 17 to 3 early in the game. I thought Auburn played its best offensive game of the year, and obviously some of that had to do with Vanderbilt's defense, but Cam Coleman made some unbelievable plays on the perimeter. So did Singleton, and Vanderbilt weathers a storm, finds a way to win. Perhaps the most, I guess it's coincidental, but the most indicative stat of this team's maturity. They've been down 20 to 10 twice at halftime. They've won both of those games. Graham pointed that out the other day. I thought that was a good poll. But man, Dylan, a crazy game, an instant classic at First Bank Stadium, one of the best games I've ever seen there. And uh, I think it's a big win for Vanderbilt in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And my first reaction is it feels like football weather outside, Joey. I
Yeah.
just walked outside and it was actually snowing. Like I checked the weather, it was like 15 degrees, feels like 15 degrees, and there were some flurries outside. So we're getting there. But yeah, that kind of sparked the vibes this morning. So it feels great to talk about football and talk about, a game like Saturday was, to your point. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I think an instant classic is a great way to put it. It was, I don't think what anybody expected going in the game. I think Joey and we talked that morning thinking about how like we're expecting it to be kind of similar to the Missouri game, like 10-7, like that kind of vibe. Like it was anything but, and it was a testament to the offense and how they are consistently proving week in and week out that they are frankly, one of, if not the best and most efficient offenses in the nation. Defense is another story that I'm sure we'll get to, but ultimately, big picture stuff it was a massive win, and this team is finding a new way. I talk about the Giant. I'm a Giants fan, and I talk about how the Giants like find a new way to lose every week. It feels like Vanderbilt does the opposite, and of course they don't win every week, but that they're showing they can win games in a lot of different ways. And when we get into the end of this season in the next few weeks, you're gonna have to win games in a lot of different ways. You just can't be a one-dimensional team, and you have to be able to win a game 45-38, and then also win a game 10-7. And am I confident the defense could hold a team to 7 points right now? Maybe not, but
Mhm.
um,
But what
they
defense in college football can nowadays?
exactly. So it's important, and in terms of the game itself, you mentioned Cam Coleman. I mean, he was dominant. Auburn's offense looked really good.
Mhm.
I think a lot of that was Vanderbilt's defense. I think a lot of it was also the QB change, the play calling change, that coach change, a spark, if you will. I think they looked really good, and the Vanderbilt offense looked like it's hard to put into words how good they looked. It's continued to feel effortless, and I think Pavia week in and week out now he's doing something new every week to help this team go out there and win games. And he's not turning the ball over. He didn't turn the ball over once. He didn't turn the ball over. He hasn't turned the ball over much at all, frankly, since the Alabama game when he had the turnover issues. Um,
Mhm.
and he's just playing winning football, Joey. And I think looking at the box score doesn't even do him, complete justice. And the box score, by the way, has looked pretty darn good the past 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Um, I still don't think it totally does him justice. He's leading this team. He's playing winning football, and him and Clark Lee have this team in a really, really good spot going forward. Vanderbilt also got a little bit of help this week with Louisville and UVA dropping to unranked ACC opponents. They were the two teams directly ahead of Vanderbilt in the college football playoff rankings from
Mhm.
this week. We don't. I don't think we're necessarily at the point where we should play like what if this happens and this happens yet.
Mhm.
But Vanderbilt will probably need a little more help as well to get in. They need some things to go right. I don't think it's all that difficult. Obviously they have to win their next two games, and then if a couple things go right as well, then we're looking at a playoff team, Joey. But for now, second bye week comes at a massive time. I think just after the pure mental and physical battle that
Mhm.
last week was, and then they'll return home to Kentucky, a Kentucky team that's been playing pretty well, by the way, if you look at it. Um, and then they'll have Kentucky and of course Tennessee to wrap up the season. So it was a massive game, one of, if not the biggest, most consequential games Vanderbilt football in a long, long time, and that's only going to pick up when we return in 2 weeks, and then Tennessee after, Joey.
Yeah, Dylan, I'm going to raise you a question here before we go into the bye week stuff because I think that is important to hit on. Put you on the spot here. I think we probably both acknowledge the best game Diego Pavia's played, or at least the most consequential, would be the Alabama game last year. It felt like nearly a perfect performance, but his numbers were better against Auburn this weekend. It was probably the best showing he's had, um, just in terms of statistical production. Where does that stack up for you in terms of his outings at Vanderbilt?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely up there. And there was a game earlier in the season that was also, was it LSU,
It was
maybe?
LSU,
Yeah.
yeah.
LSU, I think at the time, I thought that was, I thought that was his best game he's played in Vanderbilt uniform. Um, I think this one is pretty close to that. The reason being there was a lot of tempo in this game against Auburn, which by the way was something that I think Clark Lee did really well and needs credit for. I feel like they end up in situations a lot when they're down in the third quarter and fourth quarter, and they don't go tempo at all, and they slow down the ball and end up taking a 7 minute drive, and then you're behind. You're behind the clock and you're fighting the clock even more. They came out down whatever double digits at halftime, and they came out firing. And I think the pace of this game and the play calling helped Diego more, where he wasn't necessarily making unilateral like Superman plays like maybe he did against Alabama or even how he looked against LSU. I thought the LSU game was as close to a flawless game as you're going to get. Pavia did miss on a couple deep balls against Auburn. He wasn't perfect, but he did everything he needed to do. So in terms of, Diego Pavia playing the best games, I would say LSU, Auburn, and then maybe you can look back at Alabama. And Alabama was also a great game. And I would have to look back at the box score because I don't remember exactly what his stat line looked like, Joey. Um,
Mhm,
but that felt like, that was Pavia had a lot of. I remember the Eli Stowers pitch play. That was
mhm,
they spammed that against Alabama. So I think that was more, play calling and obviously Pavia working some of his magic as well. The fourth down to Junior Cheryl sticks in mind. Now we're talking about last season, but I think it's hard to compare them because he's been really magical in all of them. But what I am confident in saying to kind of bring us back in here is he's playing the best football of his career now, at any
yeah.
level. And again, consistently since Alabama, and sure, the Mizzou game wasn't perfect, but he didn't look bad in that game. It was just kind of the Mizzou defense looked good. They had a couple three and outs. But even if you exclude the Missouri game, the past really month of football has been pretty impeccable and pretty flawless from Pavia, and they're going to need him to continue to do that these next few weeks. And quarterback, you cannot overstate how important quarterback play is, especially when you get into these postseason situations. And if they have, Clark Lee called him the best player in the country. Like, I don't have to make that argument. Like, he's definitely up there. But if he's playing like one of the best players, if not the best player in the country in this home stretch, like, I don't think Vanderbilt is necessarily, out of any game at any point.
Mhm.
Kind of my 2 cents on the situation, but
Yeah.
obviously he's the glue to everything, Joey.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a little revisionist history with the Alabama game last year. I think he was really good, but
Yeah.
like we kind of mentioned, like the stat line wasn't quite as great as it has been in the LSU and the Auburn game. First of all, we'll just get the stats out of the way. 300 plus passing yards, 100 plus rushing yards. I mean, dang near nobody has done that in Vanderbilt football history, and we're not trying to compare him to a lot of the guys who didn't have super successful careers, but I mean it's still unbelievable to see um, what exactly he did on Saturday. Just
And by the way, this was against one of the best defenses in the country
yeah,
also.
right, right. Nobody we hadn't brought that up either. Like
Yeah.
nobody does that to Auburn. They had 24 points. That was the most they'd given up in a game all year. Vanderbilt put 45 on him, put 38 on him in regulation. That's a huge deal. And I think the biggest thing for Pavia on Saturday was just how he kind of stepped into those big moments and made the plays when they really mattered. Like they go down in overtime and score pretty easily. And it looks like he didn't flinch at all when they get to overtime. And maybe when they face a little adversity early, it felt like he didn't really flinch at all either. I think we've known that about him. Like we've known he's a leader in those moments, and that's really the appeal of him. But man, you just see it in a game like that, and you're like, I don't know that anyone else in the country could lead a team that way in those type of moments. again, going back to the mature team thing, it all starts with him. And I think it starts with Eli Stowers too. We talk about Pavia playing the best football of his career. Neil Stowers has probably had two of his best 4 or 5 games at Vanderbilt
Yep.
within the last 2 weeks. He looks like an NFL guy. I thought really the only big mistake he made was he's pushing a guy 10 yards down the field and he accidentally throws him into, I think it was Cedric Alexander. And it was a great block. He just threw him the wrong way. And he puts his hand up and says, "That's my fault." And I thought that was the only play that I really found a lot of fault in the entire day. And it was still a real dominant play where he could have done whatever he wanted with that defender. He just made a bad decision. Dylan, he's just playing unbelievable football too, and man, his draft stock rose in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, Stowers, I mean, he looked great and he was everything Pavia and the offense needed him to be. He wasn't he made a couple big plays over the top, but it felt like every big third down, every time they needed, a gain of 5 to 7 yards, they went to Stowers and he found a way to caught the ball to catch the ball through tightly contested coverage. And Stowers was massive. I thought the receivers had much better games after Sherrill played pretty well. Trey Richardson obviously had the big catch. I thought that was a position group that had struggled a few weeks ago, with the drops and with consistently getting open, and they weren't necessarily doing what they needed to do for Pavia. I thought they played well. I definitely want to mention the offensive line. I believe they only let up one sack the entire game, which maybe it wasn't one, but it was something like that. It was not a high number. And again, Auburn's defensive front is really stout, and the offensive line, the fact that we continue to not speak about them.
Hmm.
Is really telling. And I think maybe they were less impressive in run blocking this week, which is natural. Auburn's one of I believe the top 5 run defenses in the country. Um, the fact that this goes back to Tim Beck now because Vanderbilt they've built their identity on trying to establish the run. And they did that in the first half, and they tried to do that in the first half, and I think they broke off maybe one run, um, but pretty much it was consistently 1 2 yard gains, and it wasn't working. And I thought the adjustment that Tim Beck made in that second half, especially considering they were down, there's a game theory aspect to this where it's we understand that maybe throwing the ball will give us more yards per play on average, but we need to keep the defense guessing by running the ball, and that's the mentality I think you have to have in the first half. But the ability Tim Beck had there to come out in the second half and just pretty much let Pavia rip it and see that he is feeling really good right now. He's reading the secondary perfectly, and we can move the ball. Then they had that touchdown drive that was literally 3 plays. It was one of the quickest touchdown
Hmm.
drives I've ever seen, and it felt like Tim Beck was comfortable really throwing away the game plan there and giving the ball to a superstar quarterback. And that's not an easy thing to do as a play caller. And I
Hmm.
definitely think that needs a lot of credit, as well as the offensive line that maybe wasn't moving a ton of bodies again in the run blocking, but they held up really well in pass pro. Allowed Pavia to look through his reads, giving his guys time to get open, down the field. Like that Trey Richardson throw was wide open, can't
Hmm.
happen if the offensive line doesn't pick up their blitzers. And
Right.
I thought it was that I wasn't watching the game at all and saying saying this guy stood out, like he's not blocking well. It was really a cohesive pass blocking effort, and I think it made Pavia's day possible. And Pavia will be the first one to point that out for you, as he always does. Um,
Hmm.
saying, I couldn't have done this without the offensive line blocking for me. But I really, one of my biggest takeaways was that adjustment of play calling that Tim Beck made, and I thought he did it really well and at the perfect time, and it kind of opened everything up for that offense.
Yeah, here's another thing too along those lines. We talk all year and really since Tim Beck got here about how they're not built to play from behind. They're playing from behind dang near every week nowadays. And Tim Beck has shown enough flexibility with the play calling, and now they have enough weapons to actually be able to come back from down a lot of points, right? Like the Texas game, I think, is the biggest example of that, where some of it was garbage time, most of it was not, where they put up 21 points in the fourth quarter, got themselves dang near back in that game. This week, they're way behind Auburn, and you're thinking against that defense, how are you going to come back? How are you going to build up from behind, especially with the way they want to play? And like you said, Tim Beck kind of throws away the preconceived notion of what people thought the game plan had to be against Auburn and what they had to do to win. And he kind of pivots. That was a tremendous effort in the second half to come back and really to just air it out. And like you said, let your guy be your guy. again, though, you got to attribute that some to the offensive line. You got to attribute it to the weapons too. Like they wouldn't have been able to do that last year. I don't think there's any question about that. There's no way that that team last year is able to just come back like that and is able to rip the ball downfield every 2 or 3 plays. I haven't seen Vanderbilt do that since maybe AJ Swan and Will Shepherd were doing it against Hawaii a few years ago. Like it's been pretty rare to see them be able to just throw everything away and say, let's let our quarterback have the ball in his hands and kind of run the show here. And they've done it with Pavia over the years, but I don't think they really had to lean on that run game at all in the second half. They were so dominant in the pass game that um, it was unbelievable, Dylan. And like you said, the tempo was a big deal as well. Just a heck of a showing by Tim Beck and the offense as a whole. We'll go to the defense. If you're good on the offense, I think I saw a good tweet from Dan Wolken where he was talking about the bye week comes at basically the perfect time for Vanderbilt, specifically with its defense. I think heading into Saturday, it was really banged up. Maybe not enough to put anybody on the injury report, but a schedule like that wears on you. It had been a long time since their first bye week at that point, and it had been basically all SEC opponents between then and now. And there's an illness going around the team. And I'm just walking around the field thinking, does Vanderbilt have enough today to escape against a really physical team like this that is going to throw it a different look? I thought it was impressive that they did that. They had to grind that out in every way, despite it being a shootout. But man, it's a perfect time for that bye week, specifically for the defense. Like Dan said in the tweet, their defense has not been the same the last couple weeks as it was early in SEC play. Now I think you get a chance to recalibrate and maybe see them come out with a better performance against Kentucky and Tennessee just because they are rejuvenated a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point there with the wear and tear aspect because I think first off with it, like, yes, it was always gonna happen, like at some point. The
Hmm.
fact that it's this late in the season and most of this stuff is not popping up in a major way, I think it's a testament. It goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning of training camp, which was this plan for more sustained success through, if you remember, like they really brought back the intensity in training camp. They were resting guys. In practice. And I think we're seeing that start to pay dividends, especially on the offensive side, because to your point, Joey, the defense is more banged up. But yeah, picking up on some technical difficulties there. But what I was saying is, bringing us back together with the defense is, you know, they've now for about a month or so looked consistently pretty bad, like to put it in plain language. And maybe that's more than a month. And I think they got away with it a lot due to their success in the red zone and forcing a couple timely turnovers, specifically against Missouri, against Alabama, LSU. And then these past 2 weeks, they've really been exploited in a not so great way. I think there's really truly, and again, your offense is helping you out here, but the fact that they're beat up and they're worn down, they look beat up and worn down when you see the effortlessness that these teams have had with simply moving the ball. Miles Capers goes down with an injury. I don't think I can remember one time Ashton Daniels was really pressured after that. I think there was maybe a Bryce Cowan sack in there, but there was that and the secondary. Obviously, Auburn has some of the best receivers in the country, but you know, there's that secondary there is really getting very thin very quickly. I think Martel Hyde is, you know, he hasn't had the strongest season, and he's frankly, to put it plain, he doesn't look like a cornerback one for any team. And he's undersized, and he hasn't shown that ability to go up and make a play on the ball. I think Mark Davis and Jordan Matthews and even Colby Taylor have played well enough, but um, there's definitely a lot that needs to be cleaned up in the secondary, and a lot of that is coaching too. I mentioned this, I think, at some point, but Steve Gregory played a lot of this soft zone defense with basically dropping a lot, trying to limit the big play. And what ended up happening is Auburn was running that little stick play and just basically getting 7, 8 yards over and over and over again. And there was just not much adjustment on the defensive side of the ball with the play calling, with the personnel, with anything. And because if you look at the individuals, the linebacker room I thought has played well. Brian Longwell's played really well. Bryce Cowan had a good game. Obviously Rando Fontenette is still Rando Fontenette, and he's making plays and has been good in the slot. And in a vacuum, the outside corners, especially when you have Mark Davis in there, who I think has played well, it's not that bad, but they need to figure out how to actually come together and get stops. And by the way, forcing a turnover or two would be really nice. I frankly can't really remember the last time they actually did that, Joey.
Yeah, my thing with the corners is I just don't know that Steve Gregory has a whole lot of trust in them based off the play calling nowadays. And you can see that Auburn has excellent receivers, and I think the amount of times Martell Hyde's going to get picked on like that is pretty small. But again, like if they're having to play, if they're having to play the way they did on Saturday, that indicates something about Steve Gregory's trust level in their cornerback room and their ability to actually limit the big play. And if he's seeing what you're seeing and they're throwing it 7, 8 yards every time and he's not getting out of that, I think that indicates something to you. And maybe it can change coming out of the bye week. I think the biggest thing with that is they got to get more pass rush because we knew their corners weren't good enough to shut down high level SEC receivers anyway. I think we thought that they could get more pressure on the quarterback consistently than they have in the last couple weeks. And maybe that's the thing that helps when they're fresher. I don't know if that's something that they'll benefit from in that way, but you would think that's the most natural way in which they would benefit. But man, Dylan, this is an interesting position they're in defensively where you feel like really there's got to be some sort of magic fix for them to get back to where they were. I don't know if it comes just as a result of them having more rest and maybe being a little bit healthier. I don't know how much of this is because of that, but it just feels like they're in the same position they were a few years ago and even at times last year where it's like, well, if the pass rush isn't getting anything, the corners aren't helping them out because they're out there for too long and the corners aren't good enough to, I guess, make up for that. So, Dylan, this is a tough spot for their defense, but I think the only real hope here is one, their offense has been tremendous. Two, they've done it before at times, especially early in the year. Maybe the bye week helps them get back to maybe what they were a little bit. Obviously, I don't know that they were ever dominant. I think the South Carolina game was dominant, but also South Carolina had a backup quarterback in that game. Virginia Tech had a backup quarterback. Or no, they didn't, but Virginia Tech, I think we figured out wasn't all that great, even though Vanderbilt did make them look worse than they actually are. We're still going to figure out a lot about this defense in the next 2 weeks. I don't
Yep.
know that we really have a complete pulse on it right now and kind of what to attribute everything that it struggled with to at this point. Dylan, before we get out of here, we've got, I think, 5 minutes. Let's hit some basketball and some baseball. Vanderbilt wins uh, handily at UCF over the weekend. UCF, I think, probably bottom of the Big 12, but the way Vanderbilt just ran up that thing was unbelievable. 105 points, just unbelievable scoring output there. Everyone it seemed like they got in double digits, and it just never felt like that game was really in doubt, even though foul trouble and AKO Karake's injury down the stretch, I think maybe made it a little closer than it should have been.
Yeah, I mean, that looks great. The offense looks they're really in sync and obviously, question becomes how much can you pull from these two games? And the answer is probably not much, but I think there are some things you can take away. And I think my main takeaway has been this offense looks a lot more like a Mark Byington offense and the kind of offense that Byington wants to run. Um, they've been going a fast pace, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. And we talked about this a little bit, I think last week about, why going fast pace might actually help more against the better teams. But I think, the offense and the shot creation and the ability to create shots, not only for the player on the ball, but also the player off the ball, the movement off the ball, it looks just a lot more like an in sync offense than the Jason Edwards ISO ball that we had a lot last year. And again, the competition hasn't been great so far, so it's hard to tell if that's going to replicate, but this has every sign of being having the capability to be a top offense in the SEC. It's there for you, Joey. So obviously, the shooting has been good so far. I think Tyler Nichols been lights out as we'd expect him to be to an extent. Tyler Harris has been shooting it well. Um, I think we again take the shooting with a grain of salt because the 3-point defense will get better and shooters will cool down naturally. But at the same time, the offense looks similar to Vanderbilt footballs. The offense looks pretty effortless. So yeah, it's they're in a good spot and the defense has been strong too. I think we're starting to see kind of the group of 8 to 9 players that's going to really, take shape on this team. And go from there, Joey. But yeah, an impressive start for sure for Byington's team.
Yeah, we don't have time to get into all of it. I think we'll get more on the Wednesday night show after they play EKU, but I'm not super worried about their defense. I saw some sentiment online that I
Mhm.
guess people were worried that they gave up 93 points. A lot of that I think is due to inflated tempo. Like, what if that was an average paced game, what would the scoring have been? I don't think it would have been 93 points or really anything all that close to it, honestly. And I look at their offense and just say if they're going to play like that, if they're going to move the ball like that, and they're going to get Tyler Tanner going downhill and Frankie Collins going downhill, and they have guys that are actually capable of making shots on the perimeter. I don't think that I think they can beat teams racing to 100 points sometimes, and they did it on Saturday. I think they're good enough to be good enough offensively to maybe mask some of that defensively as well. Mason Nicholson, they should get back this week, so we'll see them at full strength for the first time. I would guess AK is fine. He looked like he rolled his ankle, but I would guess he'll at least be out there at some point this week. Maybe not Wednesday, but Saturday for sure, I would think. So we'll see how it goes. We'll talk more on Wednesday in depth when I'm not glazed over and tired. Dylan, last thing, you wrote a good baseball depth chart the other day. Before we get out of here, just hit me with your I guess, notable takeaways from that and maybe where you differed from the average person on that.
Yeah, for sure. We got a few minutes left to go. So first off, I don't want to forget this. Big shout out to Vandy women's soccer over the weekend, winning the SEC
Yeah, there
championship.
you go.
Yeah, that they were awesome. I like just kind of started following it really intently. But they deserve a quick shout out too because obviously reflecting the whole state of Vanderbilt athletics right now, and I believe they'll be a one seed in the NCAA tournament going forward, which is pretty exciting. That they seem like a pretty special team. So that's um, definitely important to point out from a Vandy sports perspective. Getting into baseball, yeah, I mean it was a fun piece to write. Most of it just came, I've been thinking about it throughout the fall ball. Definitely some things I want to point out. I think first base is something that's maybe up in the air a little bit. Went with Max Jensen there, who is definitely a question mark, and I think a guy like Carter Johnstone is probably, he'll give you a higher floor. While a guy like maybe Tommy Gooden, who we talked about a little bit, has that higher ceiling. I think he swings and misses too much. And probably won't play yet. Maybe as a junior, I could see him in a pinch hitter type situation. But Jensen's a really good player. Over from Cornell, and he's expected to be back from this ACL injury. He'll give some power in the lineup. He has experience at both corner and field spots. I think he's kind of the natural fit there at first. I want to talk about the shortstop center field situation because that's kind of, I think, the big piece to the puzzle that we haven't figured out. And the question is ultimately, does Corbin feel comfortable enough going with either Russell Rigdon or Braden Holcomb in center field? Which it's neither's natural position. I think they're both athletic enough to do it. They're both versatile enough to do it. I put Rigdon there in my depth chart just because he's pretty much succeeded all over the diamond. The more I think about it, the more I think Corbin will likely start the season with probably Colin Brightwell in center, who's the true freshman, really fast, really good defense. Can't really hit, but if he just hits a little bit, that'll be enough, and he can bunt at the bottom of the order. He really struggles against breaking balls, like really struggles against breaking balls, but if he can hit, just a little bit, Joey, then I think you see a world where he starts in center and then Rustin actually moves into shortstop. And I think his shortstop defense is one of actually the better defender. He's one of the better defenders on the team. He's a middle infielder by trade. So I think he'd succeed there, but definitely a lot to happen there. If you have Rigdon in center, or Holcomb in center, then that likely opens it up for Riker Waite to play shortstop, which is how I had it with Rigdon in center and Waite in shortstop in the depth chart. Definitely a case there where it's going to be figured out in the winter. There's no one way to possibly predict it accurately right now. But I think it'll either be Rigdon in center or maybe Holcomb there. And then Wade at shortstop, or you'll have Brightwell at center and then Rigdon at short. And just really quick note on the pitching before I get out of here. I think Austin Nye is your set in stone Friday starter. He's had a great fall. I think, is the potential to be one of the better pitchers in the SEC, which is a big jump, but he showed that last year. I think Fennel is not as much of a lock as everybody thinks he is for the rotation, for a weekend spot. I think for me, he's still pretty easily the starting pitcher too, but don't necessarily, set that in stone. I think they could use him in a bullpen sort of way as well. And then the third starter is where it really becomes, a little bit messy. And there's a gazillion guys that could be there. I think it could be Matthew Shore. I think it could be Alex Kranzler. I think it could be Luke Guth. I think it could be Brendan Cyber. I went with Nate Taylor, the Georgia transfer. I like his stuff the best. I do have questions about whether he can stretch out to that, but
Hmm,
it's college baseball. I think anybody can stretch out to be a starter. So definitely a lot of options there. And then the midweek rule is kind of a similar situation. I went with Aiden Stillman, the freshman from UVA or UVA flip. He's and he um he's a lefty. He hasn't pitched at all this fall yet. So again, he's kind of a big question mark going in, but he was the highest, highest touted recruit in this year's class, and he has the stuff to do it, and he comes from the left side. I could see him going the Austin Nye, Walker Bueller path from, you know, freshman midweek starter into becoming a significant arm in this weekend rotation. So those are basically, the things I just wanted to run down. Obviously, a lot of these things will take shape in January, but definitely um, go check out that depth chart article. It was pretty fun to put together, and looking forward to how things are going to kind of continue to take shape over these next couple months, Joey.
for sure. An interesting time in Vandy sports where obviously we've got a big football stretch here. The next two games determine whether this team goes to the college football playoff. Vanderbilt basketball getting going a little bit, a few bye games before it goes to Atlantis for a big tournament. Thanksgiving week when we really figure out kind of what they have. But baseball, another thing that we can't ignore at this point. We've got Dylan for that right now. He's done a great job on the baseball beat for the last couple weeks slash months. So, Dylan, we're gonna get out of here and rest for the week. We'll be there on Wednesday night for basketball, and we'll kind of figure out where we go from there. But thank you guys for watching. God bless, and stay tuned to the site for the next couple weeks. Stay tuned to the podcast. We'll have a lot more coming. Some of our most important podcasts of the year coming in the next week or two. So. Thank you guys for watching again. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.